So let's talk about some of the functions of the skeletal system. What does it do? It's not that hard to figure out. See under chapter outline here on page 112, I got support. Do you think it's emotional support? Your skeleton give you emotional support?
No.
No? What else does it say there?
Protection, movement, storage.
Movement. Storage of what? You store your change there?
I'm sure it's like a job.
Do you store emotions there that you don't want to deal with at the point? When you stuff them down, that's where they go.
Sure.
And storage of calcium and other salts and minerals. Okay. Bones they provide a rigid framework that supports the soft organs of the body. Without it, we'd be a giant sack of just kind of flesh, right? Bones support the body against the pull of gravity, and large bones of the lower limb support the trunk when standing. Okay, so they give us definition. The first paragraph kind of says what I just said. Without the skeletal components, we would appear as big blobs inefficiently oozing around on the ground. Might be better that way, I don't know. In addition to contributing to shape and form, our bones perform several other functions. Okay, protection. Protection of soft body parts. Your brain is probably one of the better examples of this. So within your cranial case here, your brain usually sits and that protects that. That's orbits for your eyeballs. Your eyes are set back inside of your skull. And so they're kind of protected from the environment too a little bit, but they're still able to see. They're not restricted. Your orbits are one of the coolest parts of your skull. Skull is my favorite part of the bones. That's why I got quite a few facial bones on here for you to memorize. But look at these sutures in the back here and these suture lines where they fuse together. This is made so that if you were to take a direct hit on to your eyeball would have obviously like try to explode, right? But because of the way these thin bones back here form sort of like an eggshell, they'll blow out, saving your eyeball. And the surgeon can go in underneath your eyelid and just push them back in there and save your eyes. Pretty neat. Your vertebral column. When you put all these bones together, you eventually get a canal that your spinal cord will float in, and that creates a protective cavity for it. Part of the dorsal cavity, remember? That's some others we'll talk about. Supposed to be separated by these discs, which I have not taken apart. What's the next thing it says there other than support or protection?
Movement.
Movement. Read that for me.
Bones provide spots for muscle attachment. Bones and muscles work together as simple mechanical lever systems to produce body movement.
A lever system. Storage. The intracellular matrix of bone contains large amounts of calcium salts, the most important being calcium phosphate. Calcium is necessary for all kinds of metabolic processes, one being clotting. When the bone calcium levels decrease below normal, calcium is released from bones so that there will be an adequate supply for metabolic needs. When blood calcium levels are increased, guess what happens to the excess calcium? Stored in the bones. Storage and release are dynamic processes that go on continuously. This would lend to the reason why somebody who has got thyroid issues calcium's needed to manufacture certain hormones in the thyroid. If your thyroid's not acting right, it's going to be leaching out more calcium than it should. Therefore, cause you to have like osteoporosis or some sort of problem where your bones aren't going to be as strong as they should. One of the most important things, this is under the storage, okay? The function of blood formation happens. And it's a big word. It's called hematopoiesis. Right, hematopoiesis. It's the making of new red blood cells, or the making of new blood cells, period. Happens in red marrow of the bones. Red marrow is found in cavities of most bones in an infant. Okay. With age, it is largely replaced by yellow marrow for fat storage. Pretty much all bones. But adults, it's only select bones that it happens in. Okay. Any questions so far? As a matter of fact, I think we'll learn that this happens in infants everywhere, but in adults, it's mainly flat bones, like in our skull and our sternum is the place that happens mostly. So structure of a bone. Let's zoom in on the small cellular structures of these bone structures in our body. There's three main types of cells that we need to know about. And the first one is osteoblast. Second one is osteoclast. The third one is osteocytes. And everybody should be keying in on that suffix right there, site meaning cell, osteo meaning bone, okay? Osteoblasts are bone-forming cells, osteoclasts are bone-breaking down cells, and osteocytes are mature bone cells. An equilibrium between osteoblasts and clasts maintains bone tissue. So what it's saying is, whether your bones are growing or building, let's say they're repairing. Let's say you've broken a bone. And we've zoomed in on the fracture here where the two bones do not meet anymore. Osteoblast will come in and build up a bone bridge. It's not technically the term for it, but they will build up bone material and connect those two bones together. But this huge lump that we see here of bone is not the way it was before, right? So osteoclasts will come in, they build. Osteoclasts will come in and cut that bone down and remodel it back smooth the way it's supposed to be. So osteoclasts cut down. That's how I remember those two. Osteoblast build, osteoclast cut. All right. And then osteocytes, we don't really give them much love right now. They're just hanging out there. But they are trapped in a matrix. And if you remember anything about matrix, that matrix is solidified in adults and they're not going anywhere, right? So they have to have a way to talk to each other, to transmit nutrients. And it's done through this complicated canal system. So let's read through it together. Bottom of 113. The microscopic unit of a compact bone is known as an osteon, aka Haversian. Sounds like a cheese to me. Like Havarti cheese, I think, is one. The osteon consists of a central canal called an osteonic Haversian canal, which is surrounded by concentric rings or lamellae of hard calcified matrix. Between the rings, the bone cells are located in spaces called lacunae. This sounds like a little Latin word for like a lagoon, like a little crescent-shaped lagoon or something. Small channels called canaliculi, so not a giant canal, but a small canal, radiate from the lacunae to the osteonic conversion canal. Is there a picture of this in your new book there?
Maybe if I find it.
Take your time. So we are seeing compact and bone. May not get into the cellular portion of it. Does a good job on muscle.
There was something else I seen a minute ago about skeletal.
There it is. So it's listing the two vessels here. Here's one canal. Let's see what it says. Number 12. Lamillae of bone matrix, which osteocytes embedded within the lamillae. And so those little spider looking things that are in layers, those are actually cells, osteocytes, and then they're in concentric rings, like it said. Let me reread that. You look at that picture with me. And the one in your book too, it's probably better. It's in color. Consists of a central canal called the osteonic canal. See if we can find the osteonic canal. Not exactly labeled here. Or Haversian canal. Surrounded by concentric rings of lamillae of hard calcified matrix. Between the rings and the matrix, the bone cells are located in spaces called lacunae. So I'm not going to get really technical and test you on all these terms in this section of the book or the chapter, but just because we have the time to stop and think about it, learn about it, that's what I'm doing. So your bone, once it finally calcifies, we'll call this a ring. There's going to be a spot in here where a cell is trapped within these rings here. That's what I'm seeing. I'm looking at it from the top down. And in the middle, we would see our artery and our vein. Oh, my blue is dead. This is what they're talking about as the Haversian canal or the osteonic canal. It's just a canal within a bone. We're going to get blood supply and nutrients and return waste that way. What you should take away from this picture is that there's two types of bone. There's spongy bone and there's compact bone. You have two types of bone tissue. And within this compact bone is where all this stuff takes place at. Right, if you look at this bottom picture here on page 114, you've got tuberculae of spongy bone. Anywhere you have spongy bone, you're going to have some compact bone nearby that's feeding it. So for example, this is compact bone on the outside, which is where you would find these structures. And then inside is this spongy material. Why do you think we have two different types of bone tissue like that? If I were to cut this bone in half and look at it, I would see the compact bone on the outside, and inside there would be a spongy type material. Why is that? You can see a picture of it on page 115. You don't even have to have a scientific reasoning, like what's...
Like extra protection or something. Like for,
Protection from what?
I don't know, like. I'm not sure.
Well, I can just look at it and imagine what it was like, what it would be like if my bones were solid. Like this is a solid piece of plastic. It's heavy. And if my bones were all solid, I would be very heavy. I would probably weigh twice as much, if not at least a quarter more. So just our bones being made in this manner and having some space inside allows us to be lightweight and move around. Look at the bones inside of a bird. I'm curious to know what it looks like at all. Remember, birds are the weird things in nature. Okay, it looks like they're mostly all tuberculae, large cavities. There you go. That's a great picture. See how there's only a thin layer of compact on the outside, and then they're all mostly just that ridges and network inside, whereas we have a little bit on the outside, and then is when our cavity starts. Another reason bones are hollow like that, Shelley, is because this bone that's solid versus one that has, this is a terrible bone, this hollow structure inside with this compact bone on the outside, that can withstand more force put on it that way than this one can actually, a solid bone. It actually makes our bones stronger, having that. Now, if you go as thin as the bird's bones, they're not as strong. You can snap a chicken bone, no problem, especially if it's been baked. But so it gives us strength, it makes us lightweight, especially those long bones with that shaft inside of it. A couple cool reasons. Your book won't go that deep into detail, but it's just function lending to form. So these two bone types of tissues, the first one we call compact. Okay. And we've talked about the canal system that's in there. The little lacunae where cells are trapped. And the canal system that brings them blood and takes away nutrients. They're connected by. The second part you can call spongy. I like to call it cancellous for some reason, because that's how I learned it a long time ago. When I was doing oral surgery, we would take out a tooth. And so sometimes this real sharp ridge around your teeth would break, just natural. You don't really feel it or anything. You don't really know about it. If you ever broken a tooth,
Yeah.
or broken a tooth off, you probably had some sort of damage. Your bone will actually go in there and remodel it. But sometimes we would put some bone particles in there and sew it up, and then new bone would grow into those particles and kind of graft it back. And it was called cancellous. The reason we would use cancellous bone excuse me. Horses, nope. There's a picture here. It's because new vessels are more likely to grow into those spaces rather than if we were to put that in that spot. So we were taking advantage of that spongy matrix or that hollow matrix and allowing things to grow and completely solidify it. Regardless, there's two different ways you can call this bone, spongy or cancellous. This one you could actually call cortical if you wanted to get technical, but I won't test you on those things. Okay, spongy bone is lighter and less dense. Spongy bone consists of plates and bars of bone adjacent to small irregular cavities contain red bone marrow. The plates are called tuberculae. You can see that in the picture in the bottom 114. The caniculi, instead of connecting to central haversian canals, connect to adjacent cavities to receive their blood supply. It may appear tuberculae are arranged in haphazard manner, but they are organized to provide maximum strength in the same way that braces are used to support a building. Tuberculae of spongy bone follow the lines of stress and can realign if the direction of stress changes. All right, so if I'm running and I'm doing a new exercise inside my wrist bone there, they might need to do some rearranging after so long to start taking care of that stress. A new baby is starting to walk. When their bones are forming, they're going to start forming along the lines of stress where all that weight's coming down. Pretty super neat, right? So that basically covers all of the microscopic portions of our bones. You got 3 special cells, 2 tissue types, each tissue type with its own function. One important new process about our blood being made, and 4 main functions of the skeletal system. I'm going to pause right there for a second. All right. Do you need a break or anything? Okay, go take a break. If you ever got to go, you just get up and go. So I'm looking at page 115. Take the long bone there. What I have here is a tibia. I know that because of the sharp ridge. And so there's some parts about a long bone I want you to be able to name. Maybe a good, I'm going to write some notes up on the board here. If you don't mind, read those first 3 paragraphs on 115 top left for me. Do you care to? You don't have to.
Okay. The shaft of the long bone is called the diaphysis.
Diaphyses.
It's formed from relatively thick, compact bone that surrounds a hollow space called the
Medullary
cavity. Medullary cavity in adults. The medullary cavity contains yellow bone marrow, so it's sometimes called the yellow marrow cavity. At each end of the
diaphyses,
there is an expanded portion called the
epiphyseal.
There you go. The epiphyseal is spongy bone covered by a thin layer of compact bone. The end of the
epiphyseal,
where it meets another bone, is covered by hyaline cartilage called the articular cartilage. This provides smooth surfaces for movement in the joints. In growing bones, there is an epiphyseal plate of hyaline cartilage between the diaphyses and
epiphysis.
Thank you. Bones grow in length at the epiphyseal plate. Growth ceases when the
cartilaginous.
I lost my spot. epithelial plate is replaced by a bony epithelial line.
Yeah, good job. I know that was a mouthful.
It was.
Okay, so we got the long shaft. We call that the diaphysis. And it said that on the outside, it was compact bone, just like we saw in our picture a minute ago. And on the inside, oh, that's inside. That's not how you spell inside. It was spongy bone. Okay. The diaphysis, the shaft. Diaphysis. Say it.
Diaphysis.
Yeah. Up here, these ends were called the epiphysis. Epiphysis. Okay. So just two terms for a long bone. The reason we're learning this is because it's going to come into play when we're talking about development or osteogenesis. Okay. So that cavity inside we've been talking about with the tuberculae and the sponginess, that's actually called a medullary cavity. Okay. It's another important term I'm not going to write up here. And the ends are covered in this smooth hyaline cartilage called articular cartilage. This is smooth, shiny, articulating cartilage. If you've ever been eating chicken wings and you've taken a chicken wing apart and you looked at the two round ends on each side, that's smooth hyaline cartilage. And it allows for bones to articulate together without friction. I spelled hyaline right. Hyaline, I'm sorry. But as you're a baby and you're growing, your bones are mostly made of this hyaline cartilage that's a big plate, okay? So instead of having a long bone with, baby's not going to have a bone that's calcified. It's going to be a bone of cartilage. That's why they can bend and go all kinds of different ways when they're coming out. That's why I don't worry as much when my son falls down the stairs because he's a little bit malleable, all right? I'm definitely afraid of him falling down the stairs, but he has and he's been fine. Okay. Growth ceases when the cartilaginous epiphyseal plate is replaced by bony epiphyseal line. Okay, so you can look at an x-ray and tell where this kid is at in development based on how these plates have become calcified towards the outside here. Periosteum. Okay, except for the region of the articular cartilage, the outer surface of long bones is covered by a tough, fibrous connective tissue called the periosteum. Do you know anything about the periosteum?
Besides what it says in the book.
Tough fibrous membrane. I've seen it a bunch. See if I can get a good picture of it for you. Yeah, if you get sick or something,
No.
can you see okay?
I'm good. Yeah.
Well, I don't know if they're going to, right now, they're just numbing the tissue up. Okay. So he's just cutting along the edges of the teeth, making a tiny incision. He's going to peel it back. Okay. So there's bone. That's just terrible filming. You didn't see it, but when he took that sharp spade in and peeled it back, if he had left it intact, you would see a clear membrane that he has to take with it.
Yeah.
Let me see if I can find a better one. It'll fill in. Okay, so there's periosteum. Here's just bone exposed. Here's the gingival flap, and you can see he'll kind of take it away. He's cutting it for some reason. But this tough flap right here inside is the membrane. Let me try one more. I bet probably see it better during so I was telling you about bone grafting earlier. You would want that bone matrix to go underneath the periosteum, so all those blood vessels will come in and heal it. Man, they're all just feeling terrible. Yeah, maybe I'll find a better one during the neurosurgery. But this is what hurts when you break a bone. It's this membrane that carries all the nerves and the blood vessels into those little canals. It's what needs to come back together when you heal. That periosteum is sort of the membrane that provides everything the bone needs. Without all that organic tissue, this is just a calcified piece of material. Okay, so periosteum, it's richly supplied with nerve fibers, lymphatic vessels, which are lymphatic tissue, and blood vessels and osteoblasts, builder up of bone. Nutrient forama or blood vessels that enter diaphysis bone through small openings. I'm not going to worry about you naming what a nutrient forama is. And then the endosteum, the surface of the medullary cavity, is lined with thinner connective tissue membrane, the endosteum, which contains osteoclasts. Okay. So two membranes, one on the outside of the bone called the peri. That word peri means around the bone. And then you've got an endosteum, which is a thinner, more delicate membrane. That lines the inner cavity. Okay, and here's where osteoclasts live. Osteoblasts live here. That would make sense too. Because if I have a broken bone, this inner cavity is going to be exposed. Those osteoclasts will come out and start building things back. And then the osteoblasts that live in this membrane outside will come and remodel it back the way it should be because they live on the outside. All right. When people get injuries, like my uncle had, he was cutting wood down in Keno, and he's not, I love my Uncle Bobby more than anything. He's my family member, but he doesn't make the best decisions. He was cutting with a big giant chainsaw, and he come down and got his shin. And so he went to the ER. They looked at it, they opened it up, they cleaned it out, didn't see any contact with the bone, closed it up, and sent him on his way. Well, guess what he got? A raging infection in the periosteum of his bone. When they went back and looked at it under the microscope, they could see the little edges that the chainsaw blades made. When you get a periosteal infection, it is tough to kill. It had to be months of antibiotics. So times like that, times about, patients dealing with development and growth, then it's important to know. It's just important to know for your anatomy features. The term osteogenesis and ossification are often used interchangeably to indicate the process of bone formation. So osteogenesis anyways, before I move on, new words: epiphysis, end of the bone; diaphysis, shaft in the bone. And then you got two membranes that surround the inside and outside in your medullary cavity. Also, your new cartilage we learned about. Osteogenesis. It's got that Genesis word in it that means new or beginning of. AKA ossification. Become ossified. Parts of the skeleton form during the first few weeks after conception. By the end of the 8th week after conception, skeletal pattern is formed in cartilage and connective tissue membranes, and then ossification begins. Bone development continues throughout adulthood. When do your bones stop growing? This is like middle school stuff. For girls, it's
shoot, I don't remember.
it's about 26 years old. I've always heard, like through the grapevine for girls. Boys are a little bit sooner because of certain hormones, I think. But even after adulthood, stature has been attained, bone development continues for repair, fractures, and remodeling to meet changing lifestyles. 3 types of cells are involved in development, growth, and remodeling of bones: osteoblasts, osteocytes, and osteoclasts. Bone growth and length. Okay, one more little paragraph about osteogenesis and bone growth and development. Bones grow in length at the epiphyseal plate located between the diaphysis and epiphysis of a long bone. The hyaline cartilage in the region of the epiphyseal plate next to the epiphysis, now I'm getting them mixed up, continues to grow by mitosis. You remember what mitosis is?
Where,
One cell will split
yeah,
and become 2 cells. And these 2 cells will split, and then you got 4 cells. It's kind of exponential. The chondrocytes in the region next to the diaphysis age and degenerate. Chondrocyte is a cell that builds cartilage, not an osteocyte, but a chondrocyte. So once they form, they'll degenerate. Osteoblasts will move in and ossify the matrix to form bone. This process continues throughout childhood and adolescence until cartilage grows, slows, and finally stops. When cartilage growth ceases, usually in the early 20s, the epiphyseal plate completely ossifies so that only a thin epiphyseal line remains and the bones can no longer grow in length. Bone growth occurs under influence of growth hormones from the anterior pituitary gland and sex hormones from the ovaries and testes. I'd say it has a lot to do with gravity too, because a lot of times if there's no stimulation there, those cells won't think to grow. I know this because if you have a tooth pulled, or say you lose a couple teeth, if nothing is replaced there and there's nothing pushing down on that ridge in your mandible, that bone will resorb away. So it's use it or lose it. But if I put a dental implant in there, it will usually build back up and stay there. Even though bones stop growing in length in early adulthood, they can continue to increase in thickness or diameter throughout life in response to stress from increased muscle activity or through weight gain. Increase in diameter is called appositional growth. You don't really need to know that. I'm not going to test you on that. Osteoblasts in the periosteum form compact bone around the external bone surface. At the same time, osteoclasts in the endosteum break down bone on the internal. These 2 processes together increase the diameter of the bone and at the same time keep the bone from becoming excessively heavy and bulky. So once you go back and review this, it's just giving you a roundabout way about, if you've got a shaft and a bone, this is being built on by osteoblasts. And in the meantime, this cavity is being widened too by osteoclasts. So. And that pretty much does it for development. I just saw a picture last night of a dude that had bone lifting surgery. I wish I'd saved, maybe I did save it. I'll show it to you later. He was 5'3", but by the time he was done, he was 5'9". Where they'll separate your bone, they will grow together, cut some more, separate it. For reals. So you can imagine like things like lead and other issues that come into children that are developing, how their growth can be stunted, malnutrition. All of these cellular processes can be interrupted. All right, let's pause there for a minute. Lots of info coming in. So when we're going through looking at different parts of the skeleton, we're going to divide it up into sections, and usually we start from top and go to bottom. And the first part of the skeleton we're going to look at is what we call axial skeleton. If you think about the earth being on an axis, it's like a line that goes through the middle of it, right?
Yeah.
Well, we're going to study the part of the skeleton that's down the middle of an axis, which rules out any arms or legs. You can see it highlighted in yellow on page 116. The appendicular we'll talk about in a little bit. But overall, there's 206 bones total in the body. That's an important number you should remember. You might see one or two difference. There may be one we haven't discovered yet. It's quite a big possibility. There's about 80 bones in the axial skeleton, which is not a number you need to remember. You should just remember that there's less in the axial versus appendicular. Okay, what's included in this axial skeleton? Read it off there for me.
They include bones of the head, vertebral,
Vertebral, vertebral what?
column, ribs, and breastbone or sternum.
There's one that they forget to mention there called the hyoid. Yeah, right underneath here. That's part of your exoskeleton. It's the one that's always broken during strangulation crimes, like on crime investigator shows.
Yeah.
So you'll know what to talk about next time you hear that. Their hyoid was broken. They were strangled. Okay, the appendicular. It's everything else. And this word right here lends to appendage. And you should be familiar with the word appendage. Like you know what appendage is, right? My arm is an appendage. My foot, my leg is an appendage. So we break it up into two things. It may be helpful to say this right now. The place where one stops and the other starts, obviously, it has to do with the appendages, but is this part of the exoskeleton or the appendage skeleton?
Maybe the appendicular.
Yeah. What about this part?
Appendicular.
Yeah. So these are kind of like flat bones where there's a ball and a socket joint. It's a girdle. And so this is your scapula, your shoulder girdle, and your hip girdle are part of the appendicular skeleton. Okay. That's it's like a tricky question you might see. You might see a question that says the pelvic and acetabulum, ischial spine, those are part of which skeleton? Appendicular, axial? Appendicular. Says here, the appendicular skeleton on page 116 consists of 126 bones and includes free appendages and their attachments to the axial skeleton. Free appendages are upper and lower extremities or limbs, and their attachments are called girdles. Okay, so you should start thinking about your pelvis and your shoulder blade, your clavicle, all as part of your arms and legs now. I'm gonna help you in this, thinking about that. All right, now axial skeleton. We're going to look at the skull first. You can find your skull there. It's on page 117. You got your skull. I should have one of those fancy colored skulls. Expensive though. I'm gonna look at my bone list too here. Okay, so if you look over at 119, you can see we can break the skull down into even smaller sections. We're gonna look at the cranium first, which is this dome that your brain sits in. Basically, down in here, it's going to be your facial bones. Your cranium bone is going to be back in here. And obviously, you got your frontal bone. You can see this suture right here that denotes where it stops and starts. Okay. And it goes all the way even down to the top of your nose. It forms the anterior portion of the skull above the eyes, your forehead. Your frontal sinuses are in the frontal bone as well. So you got some sinuses up here. And I've had doctors palpate my sinuses before. Like they're in there somehow. I can tell you exactly. Parietal bones are the two on the side. Okay, the two parietal bones form the most or superolateral aspect of the skull. That just means the uppermost and the sides. Superolateral. So you got one big suture coming down the middle here. And then one's parietal bone, there's the other parietal bone. What's this one in the back called?
Occipital bone.
Occipital bone. It's a single bone. Forms most posterior part of the skull. It has this large opening at the bottom called the foramen magnum. Okay. So this is part of this whole posterior bone section called occipital. My two parietal and my frontal. So hard yet, right? You should be able to name all those so far. Sphenoid is pretty tricky. If you take your skull apart, The sphenoid bone, it's not going to be delineated there, but you should hold it like I'm holding it. Yeah. Okay. Do you see this little wing-shaped bone on the side? Should see the suture there.
Yeah.
Okay. If you look at it, that bone goes all the way across the bottom and comes out the other side and has a wing shape on this side. You can see it in this picture right here. So we're looking at it here.
Okay, yeah.
If you could unexplode this or explode this skull and look at all different parts, it would be shaped like a butterfly. Okay. Let me show you a picture of it by itself. Maybe this will work. I don't know. There's a good illustration of it. So it's highlighted in green here. Those wings come up and form some of the temples of your skull. And then it's got this little saddle in the middle. It's called the butterfly bone, obviously. There it is in yellow. You can see how the wings come up on the side. So pretty neat. Let's see what comes up here. It's gonna make me buy it. So never mind. Oh, wait a minute. Cool. So this is looking at it from the back. Your eyes will be going that way. See these two slits right here? See if you can find those in your skull. Something else.
Oh, okay.
See them in there?
Yeah.
That's where your optic nerve goes through. And then this will be a nerve that comes out. It might be coming out here. I can't remember, but I know that is where your optic nerve goes through. Your pituitary gland sits right there. So that's why it's easy to go in here for pituitary surgery, because they can just cut this floor out, do work on it, and put it back up in there. Pretty neat. I'm not going to ask you to tell me which is the anterior and posterior or nothing. You should be able to just identify it on a regular picture of a skull that's color coded, you know? We'll try some more of that in a minute. So that's on your list, right?
Yeah.
It is. Palatine bone is not on your list. Nasal bones. The two nasal bones are small rectilinear bones that form the nose of the bridge. You can see those on the outside. Right here. And I would refer to this picture often too.
Mm-hmm.
Lacrimal bones. I like the lacrimal bones because they contain your lacrimal ducts. They are on your list. Lacrimal ducts are just tear ducts. And so if you think about where your tear ducts are at, the bone that's close to that is going to be the lacrimal bone. I believe you can see it might be your lacrimal duct in this model. See if I can find it on here. Just out of curiosity, if you can bear with me. Yeah, right there it is. Hmm. No, it's going to make me buy it. But lacrimal bone next to lacrimal duct. What's next on our list that we're going to talk about? Mandible is pretty easy. It's the bottom jaw, and maxilla will be your upper jaw. You can see your maxilla stops right here where your zygomatic arch begins. Okay. Cheekbones. Zygomatic bones, also called malar bones, I've never heard them called that before, form the prominences of the cheek. Where's the vomer at? See if you can find it in your other book there. It's going to be near the nose. Oh, it's on this picture. I'm sorry, 117.
Oh,
Vomer. Yeah, it's this thin bone inside. Okay, so lacrimal, vomer, parietal, frontal, nasal, temporal. Temporal we haven't named off yet. Go back to my lateral view. You can clearly see it. Yeah, it's right there. It makes part of this zygomatic arch. So your zygomatic arch is part of your temporal bone. Sphenoid, we talked about the butterfly bones you can see on both sides. Mastoid process. Okay. Process is just a prominent extension. So here's your mastoid process. Right, and then mental foramen. What's a foramen? A foramen is a hole through which a nerve or a blood vessel will pass.
it's a little hole.
Yep, and these are the mental foramen right there. You get a broken jaw, it's numb down here because that nerve has been broken. And also a dentist will come in here and put in some lidocaine around that nerve and numb it up for you. So mental foramen is pretty easy. And then the last one is the styloid process right here. Remember, this is like a styloid. You know what a stylus is for, well, it's kind of shaped like a pen. We call it the styloid process right here. And I like to remember that one because a cool bone connects to it, or a cool muscle called the sternocleidomastoid bone. We'll come to, but I want you to just remember the styloid process. And the last part, which I don't see, oh, I'm sorry. I told you your mastoid process was right here. Completely forget that. You got two processes. You got the mastoid, this thing right here, and your stylus. So you can feel your mastoid process back here. It's a bone. behind your ear.
Yeah.
It's back, it's like right there.
Mhm.
That can get filled with fluid sometimes. It can be tender. Sometimes you'll have a doctor palpate that back there. You get mastoiditis from stuff draining in your ears back into there. So two processes, mastoid. This is the one that muscle connects to. We'll learn about in the next chapter, and the stylus process right here. That's it for the skull. Let's go through them one more time together. Pick it up there. Put them back together. Okay, facial bones, we got zygomatic arch, lacrimal, vomer, nasal, maxilla, mandible, mental foramen, sphenoid, which forms some in part of the skull too, and in part of your orbits on both sides, the frontal, parietal, temporal on both sides, occipital, where this foramen magnum is. I think that pretty much covers it. Vomer. I think I said vomer in there.
Yeah.
Okay. You want to take a quick break? I don't have much more to cover today.
And don't have.
All right, then. So I talked about the hyoid bone. It's the one that's hidden underneath here, part of your exoskeleton. Don't forget about it. It's on your list there of bones. And now I'm going to look at cervical, thoracic, and lumbar vertebrae. Okay. You know where your lumbar back is in the lower, right? Well, this whole thing is called your vertebral column. But we count down the numbers and say, okay, well, that's all the cervical bones. Then we'll keep counting. And then the next set will be the thoracic. And then the next set will be lumbar. If you look in your book here, 26 bones total. That may be a good note to make. Give me the numbers for cervical spine. If you can find them there in your book. Should be 1 through 9, if I'm not mistaken. 1 through 7.
Yeah, 1 through 7.
Okay, 1 through 7 will be cervical vertebrae. And the number 1 and 2 are special ones we'll come back and look at here in a minute. They're special vertebrae. So that means number 8 through 12 or 8 through 12 are thoracic. Well, I wrote 8 twice. Vertebrae. And then 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, right? 13 through 18 are lumbar vertebrae. Well, where's those other 26 or those other 8 bones at? They're down here fused in your sacrum, sacral bones and coccyx. I don't really want you to separate those out. I just want you to know cervical, thoracic, and lumbar vertebrae. So if I say something like L5, you know that is the 5th lumbar down here and the last one. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. If I say T12, you know I'm talking about 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, this bottom thoracic vertebrae here. And also it makes sense that this is called thoracic spine since it's next to a thoracic cavity, right? This is a lumbar region, lumbar spine, and then obviously cervical. Anything that has a neck will be cervical. Even a uterus has a narrow opening neck like. Okay, so we call it cervix sometimes. So 7 cervical vertebrae, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 5 thoracic, and then roughly 5 lumbar. You should make sure you know those. T1 Do T12. That don't seem right to me. There's 12 thoracic and there's not 12 up there. That's where my 26 is. 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19. Oh, no. That's bad. There's something not working with that for me. All right. 12 plus 5 is 17, right? Plus 7 will be 24. Okay. And then the other two bones on there, sacrum and the coccyx, are what we're considering the last two. Sorry about that.
You're okay.
They have these discs in between them, which help cushion them. You have in front of you there. Here's another foramen. We've learned about mental foramen, magnus foramen underneath your skull there. This is called a vertebral foramen. Okay. And together they make up vertebral canal. Here's other process, like the mastoid process. And then this is called the body. So people have nerves when these connect, they come out here. You may already be familiar with this. Well, sometimes those discs will get squished where they get screwed out, and the nerves that are coming out of here, like in this model, will push on them. And they might have to go in and just make this hole bigger with a drill. Well, that will free up that nerve a little bit.
Okay.
They might even go in and just take off this whole process, called a laminectomy or something. It depends on where it's at and where the problem is. Obviously, anytime you do surgery here, you're risking anything below it, right?
Yeah.
Okay. I'm not going to ask you about a transverse process. I might ask you a question about vertebral foramen, but if you know what a vertebrae is and you know what a foramen is, you'll know it's the hole in the vertebra, right? We'll come back and talk about the auditory ossicles later, so you don't need to worry about that right now. Last thing, sternum. Obviously, the bone that your ribs connect to. Breastbone in the anterior midline. It's an important anatomic landmark. The jugular suprasternal notch is easily palpable. So you feel it right there. Suprasternal notch. Central indentation and superior margin of the sternum. Superior portion of the sternum articulates with the clavicles and the first two pairs of ribs. Okay, so your clavicles do connect to your sternum right there. For some reason, I've never really understood this. Anytime you break a clavicle bone, nobody ever gets excited over it. They don't even like fix it. They just put your arm in a sling and it will heal automatically somehow. I do know ribs are the only bone in the body. If you were to cut one off, like say you're trying to get access to a lung, it will grow back. And then we'll learn about floating ribs and all that. I'm not really too worried about you knowing which ones are floating and which ones are true ribs, stuff like that. So now you got some ribs in there. Okay. So between now and Friday, you should go back and review this front part of the chapter. Not a whole lot of information, but development, functions, some cellular processes, some of the membranes in a long bone and parts of a long bone. And then all these parts of the axial skeleton that we've named off today, including the skull, types of vertebrae and stuff.